So I'm going to talk about how to take your idea and turn it into a sci-fi or fantasy concept for either a TV show or a feature. So basically, when you're coming up with your concept, you shouldn't start with the science or the fantasy. It always, you got to start with the idea, with like, you know, what's the heart of your story? What is your story trying to say? What are you trying to tell? What are you trying to say? And what is the best way to tell that story? And is it through science or is it through fantasy? So how do you know what's best for your story? My advice is to go with what would give you the best visual story. There was a sci-fi rom-com called Timer. It wasn't very popular. I've seen it on Netflix and now I can't find it anywhere. But I did a video on it a while back. And basically it's about you live in they're living in a world where people can insert timers into their wrists, and the timer will let you know the exact day and time you're going to meet your soulmate. So that, you know, that was basically about the science in that was about, you know, time and waiting, and it was about love, but it was really like people wanted a solution to knowing if they were with the right person, and this company came along and gave them a logical solution. You know, like, okay, we're gonna let you know when you're gonna meet the person you're meant to be with for the rest of your life. And it's a guarantee that, you know, in real life, you just do not get. So, of course, everybody and their mama got timers, but not like the whole world. I would say a majority of this world has timers. And it gets to the point where I think you can legally get a timer in when you're 13 or 14 years old. So, like, you know, they have little timer parties. Oh, you know, little Jimmy's about to get his timer inserted. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so the movie brings up a lot of questions about love and fate and waiting for the one. There's even a dream sequence where the main character is watching a pot waiting for it to boil, you know, like the whole watch pot doesn't boil metaphor. And in her pot is an egg because also her biological clock is ticking. But it's not until she decides to stop obsessing over waiting and trying to find the one and moves on with her life that she actually meets her soulmate. So it's like, like I said, it's not necessarily about love, but it's about the waiting and the time you spend trying to find the right person. And that's why it was great as a sci-fi. I did another video a while back on this fantasy rom-com called Pushing Daisies. It was short-lived. It was on ABC. Loved it to death. The show is about this guy. He's a pie maker. He owns a pie pie shop. And he has the ability to bring things back to dead, bring things back from the dead for like a minute. If he doesn't touch them again, like he touches it, it comes back to life. If he touches it again, it goes dead for good. If he doesn't touch them within a minute, then something else of equivalent value would die. So this is all living things, including plants, fruits, animals, bugs, people, anything that can live and die, he can touch it and bring it back to life. Basically, someone discovers his secret, and that person is a private detective, so they decide they want to use him for his business because he can go around touching the dead people and asking them how they died and collecting the reward. Voila. So one day he touches the person who is his long lost love, like childhood love. And he hesitates touching her again when the minute is over, and boom, somebody else dies in her place. So now she's, you know, alive, and he might as well keep her alive because somebody else died for her. And they have a romantic relationship, but because if he touches her again, she's gonna die again for good. Now they can never touch. So it's a very sort of whimsical like show. It has a very fairy tale feel, and it also has a very 50s feel. Like if you see the main love interest, the woman, all of her clothes are very 50s, very in the style of the 50s. His pie shop looks like a 50s style diner. So it's this whole whimsical thing. So, you know, so yeah, so fantasy rom-com. So there are basically two things you must decide with your idea: whether it's best suited for fantasy or sci-fi, and whether the concept will fit in a movie, or does it have the potential to carry a whole entire television series. So now, how do you decide which is which will be better for which? So the two examples I just gave were both rom-coms, and one was a movie, one was a TV series. Also, one was fantasy, the other was sci-fi. And I think when you look at the sci-fi versus fantasy, the sci-fi was a very logical approach. Like I said, with the timers, and you know, people wanting to know if they were going to meet their soulmate, and this company gave them a logical solution. So it was very logical. And the TV show was very whimsical. You know, it's a show about death and grief and unrequited love. So it was very emotional. The show was very emotional, and and it was also not just a fantasy rom-com, but it was also a cozy mystery. You know, think Murder, She Wrote. Very cozy mystery. They're solving a murder every week. And so, like, that's what makes it a series. There is, like, you know, yes, he could have done a movie where he brought his, you know, long lost love back to life, and dealt with them not being able to touch each other. But because it's a cozy mystery, that's best suited for a series, because then every week you're solving a different crime, and that also can show them getting closer and figuring out how they're gonna, you know, develop this relationship, how they're gonna have a relationship. So it's very well suited to a series. And the same thing with the timer. They could have done a series where, you know, every week you see a different person try to find their soulmate, or, you know, stretch out this person finding her soulmate over a season. But that really is not a premise that could really survive, you know, could carry a series. So that's best suited for a feature, you know, because it's very closed loop, very limited, to have, you know, okay, this is about this one person trying to find their soulmate, and will they find their soulmate? Will they or won't they? So for another example of a sci-fi movie is Blade Runner. Now this is a classic. If you haven't seen it, it's basically Harrison Ford hunting down these things called replicants, which are basically very human-looking androids. And because they were so very human looking, like if they were to mix into human society, you wouldn't know who they were. So if you had to try to figure out if somebody was a replicant, he had a very specific interrogation that he had to do with these replicants, and he could figure out by the questions, the way they answered the questions, whether or not they were a real person or whether they were a replicant. And so also around that movie, there was a huge discussion over whether or not Harrison Ford's character was a replicant. You know, it didn't help that the director kept changing his answer. Sometimes he would say yes, sometimes he would say no, depending on the way the wind blows, I guess. But people felt like he was a replicant because replicants were made for certain uses. Like either they were made for physical labor, or they were made for, you know, to be a pleasure replicant, and you can figure out what that means. But he was made for, he was doing a specific purpose. His whole purpose was to find rogue replicants and hunt them down, because replicants were only supposed to live for 6 years, and then after 6 years they were going to be decommissioned or basically shut down, killed, whatever. And at the beginning of the movie, a bunch of these replicants went on the run. They were very rogue, and he was hunting them down one by one. And then So, okay. Okay, so so basically the main theme of Blade Runner is about what it means to be human. And one of the replicants was played by Rutger Hauer. And he has this very famous speech he says right before he dies. And I have to read it verbatim. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in the rain. Time to die. Everybody loved that. It sounds so very poetic for somebody who's not supposed to be human. And that's what that brings up. Like, he has these deep feelings and emotions despite the fact that he is an android. And so his speech really brings into play what makes you human, what makes you worth being able to live, because they were made, and they were made for labor. They never got to experience life or pleasure of their own. They were just used. So it's like, are they also not worth living? Back to Blade Runner, the idea of what it means to be human naturally feels like a subject for sci-fi, because it naturally brings up biological questions. Science is best to explore that subject, what it means to be human. I guess you could do fantasy, but I feel like that's better served as sci-fi. So let's talk about the fantasy movie everybody's been talking about this year, Sinners. Yes, I have not done a video on it yet, and I need to watch it again, but we're not going to go into an in-depth analysis of Sinners and all of the meanings and Easter eggs and everything, that's in that fabulous movie. Let's just look at the overall thing. It has a very simple thing. Be careful of what you invite into your life, which, feels very on the nose because of vampires, and you have to invite them in. The preacher father warned his son that his gift can invite the devil into his life, and it literally did. Like, he was playing that song, and because they heard him, they were drawn to them in their little barn or whatever that was. Okay. But they're also the twins, played by Michael B. Jordan. They were constantly inviting trouble into their lives, from stealing from the mob, buying from the Klan. Like, everything they did was inviting trouble into their life, and they just couldn't stop. Being so desperate for cash, one of them actually was contemplating inviting the vampire in. But he didn't know he was a vampire. But the fact of the matter is, you have to be careful of your decisions because of the consequences that can come from the decisions you make. And the one who was desperate for cash and wanted to bring that vampire in ends up eventually becoming a vampire. So, consequences. Actions have consequences. They were running on luck, and his luck ran out. So the vampires was used to visualize many things, but mainly be careful of what you invite into your life. And you have no idea what you're inviting in, what the consequences of what you invite in may be. And yes, the twin who became a vampire, now he's this immortal being, but at the same time, he was separated forever from his beloved twin and everyone else he knew and loved. So yes, he was immortal, he lived forever, but he was also almost exiled from his life, from any life he ever lived. He had to completely start over because he was now a vampire. So yeah, so that, so you can see the logic in Blade Runner, because it took a lot of logic to figure out who was a replicant and who was a real person. Like, there was no machine. Like, although you would think this is the future, And they should have a machine that he could just hook them up to, and the machine says, replicant. There was no machine. Because, like, one of the things you see in the movie is how they were made. Each part of the replicant was made by a different scientist. And, like, they showed the scientist who all he did was focus on eyes. He made their eyes. And so, like, so it wasn't just like they were made in a factory. Like, they were made with scientists who focused on making their part as realistic as possible for a thing that's only going to live for 60 years. But that's how it went. Harrison Ford's character, I think his name was Deckard, he had to use logic to figure out who's real and who's replicant. So Blade Runner, very logical, uses logic to weed out the replicants. And then you have Sinners, very emotional. A main thing in this film was music, and the music inspired emotions in people. So it was very emotional. So fantasy. So sci-fi, logic, fantasy, emotional. So now we get to, with your idea, the idea that you have, whether it will be good for a movie or a TV show. So is it open-ended or is it limited? Like I said, you know, timer was very limited. It was very closed loop. So that was best served as a movie. And then Pushing Daisies, you know, had all these potential for all these different plots. So it was best served as a series. A good way to test to see if your idea is open-ended or limited is to see if the concept still holds with multiple plots. Is your concept open-ended or limited? So can the concept support an unending number of potential plots? Maybe you can think of a concept that only lasts up to 10 episodes. That's a limited series, like Watchmen or The Penguin. Like, you know, you can see it being, you can see multiple plots and you can see it being longer than a movie, but not a never ending amount of plots. Because, like, we don't know if the Penguin's going to come back, but Colin Farrell said himself, he thinks they've gone, you know, he's gone as far as he can go with the character. So he believes it's limited to one season. Or maybe your concept will work well with an anthology series like American Horror Story. Same concept, different characters, and different situations each season. So yeah, so like not necessarily an unending amount of plots for the same amount of people, but we can explore the worlds of a certain type of people each season, and every season explore somebody different. That's also a valid series, but you know, you got to think about what works best with your series. But if your idea does not support a multiple number of plots, then it is limited and best served as a movie. So yes, movies do have sequels and prequels, but that's capitalism. That's not about that's not about ideas. Okay. And is your concept best visualized through science or fantasy? So now you need to think about, is there an inherent logic that will lend itself to science? Like Blade Runner, like, you know, thinking about the concept of Blade Runner. What does it mean to be human? So that logic, you know, you deal with, okay, you want to compare humans to androids. And then you want to have these androids be so human-like, you have to figure out, you have to go through this whole entire test. So it's like the androids are scientific, but the test itself is also scientific, because it's like it's sitting there and it's asking you questions, and your answers, you know, like somebody say, with some tests there are no right or wrong answers. The way you answer them can show whether or not you are an android. Because I think one of the main questions was asking about dreams, because I think androids can't dream, which goes back to the novel. It was adapted from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? So if your idea doesn't support, oh wait, no, I already did that. Okay. Is there inherent logic? Da 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 da. Or is it more emotional, like Sinners? Is it about? Okay, so with Sinners, is it about, like, I feel like the main, like I said, the main through line of Sinners is all these people making all of these decisions for their life. You know, the twins, how they wanted to live their lives, and the little cousin, I can't remember his name, how he wanted to live his life. Was he going to give everything up and, you know, live life the way his father wanted to, or was he going to live life the way he wanted to? So it's very emotional. Sinners was very emotional. Even their backstories, you know, of them having to deal with their father, and, you know, and they always have this reputation, and they sort of, like, I feel like the reputation came, and then they sort of leaned into it, but it's all very emotional. So if you feel like what you're trying to say is emotional, then yes, that is better served with fantasy. Once you've answered those questions, basically, you know, you have your idea. And does the idea lend itself to logic or emotion? And I know those are very simplified things. It's not an exhaustive answer, but it's a great answer for science or fantasy, logic or emotion. And is it limited, which would make it a movie? Or is there an multiple number of potential plots that you can bring out of this? Or, like, once you have answered those questions about whether or not your idea is best served with science or fantasy, or whether it's a feature or a pilot, then you are ready to start writing the script. And if you want to take your series concept to a TV pilot, well, I have the workshop for you. I am doing a How to Build a Killer Sci-Fi Fantasy TV Pilot workshop August 13th at 6 p.m. CST. Link for it is in my description. So if you want to go further than just creating a concept, I can help you take your concept to a TV pilot script. In the workshop, we're going to be looking at Stranger Things and The Witcher, Lovecraft Country, and Game of Thrones. Thanks for coming out. I shall see you later. Goodbye.